I think it might have been 1956 that we came, but I can't remember exactly.
Oh, yeah.
I was 17 and a half. A 10-pound palm is the word. Yes, and all that was visible of Fremantle at that time were a few tin sheds, and we wonder where the heck we'd come to. And it was 105 degrees on the old scale. Is what?
Is the half important?
Oh, yes it is actually, because I decided that having been in advertising in London, I wanted a change of pace and I wanted to be an air hostess. And so I applied to East West Airways, and she said, well, you're not old enough, you've got to come back in 6 months, which I did. And she said, we go to Kalgoorlie, it's really hot up there, do you think you can handle it? And around about that same time I was offered a job in advertising again, with Arthur Collett Advertising, and I took it. I should have probably been the air hostess, it would have been more adventurous, very likely. Maybe, yeah,
So
go on.
where did you live when you first went to Fremantle?
We first of all stayed in a hotel in Maylands, and one of my earliest memories of hearing this radio commentary at a very fast pace, and we thought it was horse racing, but it was betting.
What?
No, we thought it was an auction or something like that. We couldn't hear it properly, but it was actually horse racing, over the radio, and it was. Well, we didn't know what it was, and it seemed to be going on endlessly, so that was quite funny. And then we rented a flat in South Perth. And then my parents bought a house in Cannington on the river, and it was quite countrified in those days, which I believe it's not anymore. My father bought a ex-Admiralty motor torpedo boat after the Second World War, and he had it towed down the Thames because you couldn't, what's that? You couldn't run them, yes, you couldn't, the motors were removed. Just the tanks and things where the fuel was were still in there, which was covered with a heavy rubber lining thing to stop it rattling and whatever, rotting I suppose, and one thing and another. Anyway, we were introduced to this ship late one night in the dark, and we had to wander across a paddock full of cow pats, as my mother called them, with a kerosene lantern. And I've since written a bit of a story about it all, saying it was a harebrained idea, and that's what she said at the time. Oh my God, your father's got got one of his harebrained ideas. Well, we knew it was there, but we hadn't been there, and he chose to take us at night for some obscure reason. We had to go across a ferry, which was a punt in those days with a pole, walk through these paddocks, or fields as they were called, and with dodging all the cow pancakes, cow pats, climb on board this thing, and it was an ex-Admiralty ship. It had nothing in it, no furniture, and it smelt of diesel, I suppose, or whatever it was, high octane it was, because it was a torpedo boat. It had to do chases in the channel after enemy whatevers. So therefore it had to move very quickly, which would have been a high octane, I think, or something very, very strong.
Yeah, well, they were.
Yeah, and it was beautiful inside. It was polished mahogany with brass fittings, and the WC, as it was called, had Alexandra roses painted around the door. Some artistic shipmate had done it, and there was a comforts book in the drawer which detailed all the gifts that were handed out, that, you know, Women's Institute people knitted them, socks and beanies and stuff, and it was recorded who had what and things, and I've still got the book somewhere, but it's quite interesting. It's sort of like a relic of a long time ago. There was an amazing community along the river there. All sorts of people ended up there in different types of boats. There was a Dutch barge, and there were pontoons converted with a lid on top that people lived in. And there was a fellow along there who was a bit of an eccentric, who used to build these monoliths of like the sculptures here at, what do you call it, Broken Hill. And my brother and I used to walk through the back of his place, and he had these enormous things. There was one that looked like, I think he called it Queen Victoria in her bath or something. There was this enormous bath with this solid-looking lady in it. We used to laugh and frighten ourselves to death because they cast shadows in the evening, and you can imagine all sorts of spooky. She what? Yes. Yeah. So yeah. And then in winter time, it was snowing on the Thames banks. Some of the more severe winters, and this fellow used to come down with all his gear on, and he'd strip off down to his what do you call them? Budgie smugglers. Oh, sorry. Okay. And he'd dive in and he'd come out absolutely lobster red from the cold water.
Not for last night, I agree.
Yes. So eventually my grandmother had a stroke, and we had to go and live with her in Ashford, Middlesex, where she had a house. And so my father reluctantly had to sell the boat, and he sold it to a fellow who wanted to go around the world in it. So he had it all fitted out, and he trotted off up the Bristol Channel, and somehow or other it caught light and burnt down. That was the end of it. So I think he was quite disappointed that it didn't make it round the world and back and get in the news and all that. He was very attached to it. It was an interesting life. We had no water that we could use. You couldn't use Thames water. It was like Thames water. It was like pea soup. So we had to row down to the ferry where there was a well and fill up jerry cans and things and take them back.
Did you eventually get furniture?
Yes, but he didn't need very many because there were tables that fitted out for the crew that would flap down, and benches and bunks and stuff. So in the end, I don't know where our furniture was, where we had it. It must have been some sort of storage. Only in later years, after my father retired, they moved to Margaret River, and he had a part-time job in the Tourist Bureau, which he quite liked because he used to paint pictures of the local scenery and put them up in there and sell them.
The big polystyrene rock that he made.
Yes, that was when they moved to Kenwick first, and then they moved to Margaret River. But he then worked for a furniture company in Perth. I'm trying to think what it was. They used to make outdoor furniture, lazy boys and that type of thing. I can't remember what it was called. It was quite well known. And he still had time to paint, and was always looking for something new, and these rocks for landscaping courtyards and things he made out of styrene foam and painted them in all the colours that you might see in the outback, or ironstone type look, and you'd swear they were real, but they had to be pegged down. Yeah. The main problem with this was anchoring them sufficiently into the ground.
And so, how old were you when they
I was 20. I was about to get married in a short while. Yes.
That lasted a couple of years, and then what happened after that?
Well, then we had a flat in Mount Street to start with, and then we bought a funny little house at Kenwick, not far from where my parents lived. And from there, when we split up, I moved to a flat in South Perth and sold that little house for $6,000. $6,000. Well, we didn't pay very much for it. I think we paid $1,000 for it or something. So over the period of years, it was a little old wooden place on quite a big piece of land, but it was the back of Kenwick, and there was nothing there in those days. Yes, well, I'd say so. I mean, there were a few houses round about, but it was, nobody would have wanted it because it was a little old wooden house, and we had a stone fascia put in across a fireplace, and we had an Italian stonemason come and do it. It was 2J stone, which you might be familiar with. It's a beautiful green, almost like a jadey look stone, and he put brick underneath and then he faced it, because it's expensive, with this 2J stone, and it looked amazing. So we used to hold large logs on there. We had 8 very large apricot trees, which had been there for donkey's years, I suppose, but each year they were very early apricots, and we used to laboriously try and lay them out how the fruit growers do, in beautiful rows, and take them to markets. But it used to bring in about $200 in those days, because they were early ones. Yeah, cases, we had to buy cases and put them in so that they can sell them by the case in the fruit markets. So the little old Renault, which was absolutely the smallest car on the road practically, used to get stuffed full of apricots in crates with several trips to the Perth markets. And yeah, and at this stage I was still working in, no I wasn't, where was I? I was at Sandover's in the middle of Hay Street, which is a big hardware and general store, and I was employed to do their builder's catalogue, which required rounding up all the different departments, sort of, you know, plumbers, hardware, gardening. There were hundreds of departments, not hundreds, a lot of departments in this store that sold a lot of hardware items for different trades and purposes. And so I was employed to do a builder's catalogue. But halfway along that term, I got pregnant with Kylie, and I had to leave. So by this time we were living in Kenwick, and Kylie was born in Victoria Park in a small nursing home there. And what happened after that? Well, the next year we used to go to Rottnest for holidays sometimes, not for very long at a time because we didn't have much money. And then I was 6 months pregnant with you, I think, when we split up, and I moved to a flat in South Perth after you were born. And then shortly after that I met a fellow who was going to join the army, and he said, do you want to come on a trip across the Nullarbor while I joined the army? Yeah, yes, okay. So I thought, where am I going to stay that's not going to cost an arm and a leg? And I rang up the Salvation Army, and they had a hostel in George Street, the bottom end of George Street, I think it was. So off we went across the Nullarbor in about 4 days. And
was his name Barry?
Beg your pardon?
Was his name Barry?
Yes, yeah. And he was off to, what's the name of the place in Paddington? Something Barracks.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, that's it. That's where he was going.
Victoria Barracks, and so you came across
with him in his Holden, old Holden.
And we flew across it.
Yes, but that was a bit later. I stayed there for a few weeks, and I got all these lumps come up on me, and they were bed bugs that came out of the wall in the Salvation Army hostel. But I had a friend from Perth called Mariette and Case Mullenberg, and yeah, they lived at Northbridge, and Mariette said, oh, you can't stay there, come and stay with us. So from there I found a flat in Kirribilli. So then
What was the name of the street where you said?
Kirribilli Avenue.
What was it?
Yes, Kirribilli Avenue. And it was halfway along, I suppose, that main street. We had a tiny little view of the Opera House, and we had a clothesline that I was only supposed to use once a week, but nobody told me that. And the first time we moved in there, I put all the clothes on the line, someone dragged them all off and stuffed them on the floor in the laundry. Told me to mind my own business and pick the day I was supposed to pick or something. Some old bat out up the top somewhere. Anyway, so then you went to, what do you call it? A day school.
Kirribilli.
Or what did they call it? It wasn't kindergarten. It was There's a day nursery you went to because you were too young to go to school. And in the meantime, I got a job at Waterhouse's place, cleaning and taking her daughter to Ascham or whatever it's called. Ascham, yes. And when necessary. And they had a big dog big Great Dane called Fury. and Suzanne Waterhouse was the lady of the house. And they had this enormous house with a beautiful garden with sweeping views of the harbour and the opera house and so forth. And she used to lend me books and things, so she had a big library there. But she also had a few problems with the neighbours because there was a big block of flats next door that were not very expensive flats, I suggest. And this poor fellow who lived in one of these flats used to hang his undies and socks right across her kitchen window. So she used to complain bitterly about this, but nothing was ever done. So I stayed there probably for about 6 or 8 months, cleaning and what have you, ironing and general factotum around the house. And she said, "Oh, my husband's going away overseas and I won't need you anymore." So, right, okay. Round about then, I think I decided we'd go back to Perth. Kylie, in the meantime, had gone to Milsons Point Public, and I think you, can't remember, did you start there?
I started Kirribilli.
Yeah, yes. Milsons Point.
Oh, I remember this kid used to fly on the playground and hold my hand. Fly on the playground. I was a bit of luck stuff.
Miss Swords, do you remember Miss Swords, Kylie? Yes. She was the headmistress at the time. It was a very old school. And so then we decided that we'd drive back to Perth. And in my Peugeot. No, it wasn't anything like that. It was probably 403, I'd say. And we got to North Sydney with all our belongings having gone by Grace Brothers, apart from the general things that I could stuff in the car. And the left axle broke. It being a Peugeot had 2 axles and one broke.
Bloody French.
So that got fixed and then the other one broke. So your father fortunately paid for all that. And we took off via the Blue Mountains to Port Augusta eventually. We stopped at Hay and ate cherries till they came out of our ears just about. You may not remember that. 3, something like that, yeah. And I had to put the car on the train along these lines, I suppose, onto one of these, like a trailer almost, which I was dead scared I'd tip it over the side or something. Anyway, it got on there all right, and we got on the train and we got off at Kalgoorlie.
I also remember in Kirribilli,
Yeah.
so Kylie had lost a bang in the water.
Oh yes, yeah, that's
She threw
true.
something, a bang like,
Yeah.
and you went up, got changed into swimmers,
Yes.
and in the water to try to find it.
Yeah, well, the water was so murky, I didn't have a dog's chance. I've forgotten that. It was near the ferry, on the ferry. Yeah. So Sydney was quite good then because we could go to lots of places without it costing any money. You could go to the museum and it didn't cost anything, and go across the ferry and have picnics and.
Can you remember also on the ferry one time, right, there's a couple on board and they were just going for it, like on board.
No.
I was thinking,
I remember I took.
don't stare.
When I stopped working for Waterhouses, Miriam, I can't remember her other name, she had 2 girls that lived in flat opposite, and she worked full time. She wanted some. Stephanie.
It's Cheryl.
No. That was Stephanie. Yeah, see, Miriam.
Parties, were they?
Eh?
There was Rattan, that's the only one of the
Oh, well, there was another story. I used to take you to school. We'd walk along Kirribilli Avenue and all the little kids used to pop out a bit like the Pied Piper and join in. So the whole lot of us used to troop off to Milsons Point Public. But one day, Rattan came out and he said, "My mum's having a baby and she's on the kitchen table," and she said, "Would you come in and help?" And I said, no, I can't do that, but I'll ring an ambulance or something of that sort. Or I think the neighbour came in and she said, "Don't worry, dear, I'll fix it." And Mrs. What was her name? Who used to live up Clayton. That's right. She used to.
I remember that.
She used to make us scones, and they were like bricks. We had one of those rubbish disposal things being upstairs where you just put it in, it ended up in the rubbish bin 2 stories down. And I can remember these scones going boing, boing, boing as it hit the side of this thing.
Scones flying in,
Oh dear.